or close.
You're right. I agree with you there.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Troy?
I've been listening in, not listening well, but listening in. It sounds like you guys are catching up. That's great. It's great to hear. I'm going to kick off this thing pretty quick so we can get to the content and material of the education portion of this so we can get back to the checking in on each other. I like that part too. With that, I'm going to remind everybody that this is a meeting of Masons for the state of Louisiana, or other folks. You know, there's a couple of guys from Texas that beat on here too, but this is not a tiled lodge. It's not a tiled meeting, and this will be recorded for social media purposes, upload later on. With that being said, I'm also going to mute the participants at this time. Stand by. I'm going to attempt to mute the participants at this time. Hold on here. Let me see if I can do that. Manage participants. If there was a mute all for other people that we know and love, that would be great. However, I got a chance to go over some of the things that wrapped up the trivium. And I want to dive right into the education portion of this, like I mentioned earlier. Let me get this out of the way here. I'm still doing well with the Zoom meetings, but there's always new stuff to learn. All right. Can everyone see the screen? Yes? Okay, good. I see several nods. That's great. With the trivium, we talked a lot about grammar and rhetoric. Now we're going into more of the logical part of this. And I saved logic for the last part of the trivium. Some people put it in the middle before rhetoric, and that's totally normal. That's a very logical thing to do. But I didn't do it for the sheer purpose of not diving deep into something right off the bat. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do grammar and then rhetoric. And again, the first couple of meetings on this, on the Friday nights, were a little lighthearted as well. But I didn't want to get into something deep and heavy right off the. It's like having your steak for your appetizer, right? You always save the main course for the main course. So I went in a little bit light with some of the other educational topics. Those went well. I wanted to continue with the theme, and we are on to logic. However, those in the northwestern part of the state of Louisiana got a chance to see something earlier today. And with that, I want to make mention of first things first. That being the Barstow Air Force Base flyover of the B-52s. Gentlemen, if you've never heard a B-52 flyover, and if you live in Louisiana, I don't know how you haven't. It is the sound of freedom overhead. They call them buffs. They call them B-52s. I'll let this video show you. And those guys flew over more than just the hospital that we were at. They recommended not going out and gathering up to be able to watch this. Of course, when they made that recommendation, they didn't think about the healthcare workers that are stopping what they're doing to go outside to gather up to watch this. However, what they meant was don't congregate in parks and parking lots and that kind of thing. And we didn't do that today. And I'll tell you a part of the story in just a moment. But here are a couple of shots from folks coming out to actually watch that. You know, some folks, and of course their identities are hidden, so I can use their images here, right? The ambulance is there over the Willis-Knighton health system. Of course, they flew over all the hospitals. They had a multiple different flight pattern to go over there. Let me go back just one slide here. And the reason we were where we were at Willis-Knighton right over by the helicopter pad is because this window right here, and I don't know, there's two windows on this building. Mary Jo, my wife's brother, her younger brother, is inside that facility. It is a long-term living nursing facility, and he can't have visitors. And so that's the hallway he's at. So we were proximal to him when the country tried to show some support during those times when the healthcare workers and some of the people in his building were able and mobile to be able to come out, but he was not. So it was the closest way we could be close. With that being said, going on to the normal 6 tags of the discussion: something to research, something to read, some online resources to learn about, and then the discussion, and then scripture and close. Something to research. Well, the topic in itself is something to definitely research. What is logic? Logic is defined as developing the faculty of reason and establishing valid, aka non-contradictory, relationships among facts, yields basic systematic understanding, right? So we're talking about systematic understanding of things. And we're going to get into that a little bit more later too. But it's a guide for thinking correctly. And I'm going to use that, and I'm not going to finger quotes correctly. It's a guide for thinking correctly, thinking without contradiction. More concisely, it's the art of non-contradictory identification. And if you noticed in the previous 2, grammar and rhetoric, those 2 were also defined Masonically and educationally as art as well. So the art of non-contradictory identification. Something to read: the taxonomy of logical fallacies. We're going to get into logical fallacies tonight too. Something very interesting for me to read about, given the current situation. As we say in the South, with everything going on. So for the taxonomy of logical fallacies, we'll get into some of those in terms of what is fake news and maybe not. Without going into the politics of things, I still want to stay out of that. The second thing to read or look for or watch for or look up is artwork about the first 3 trivium: logic, grammar, and rhetoric. See what you can find in terms of artwork about those 3 subjects. You want to talk about an idea having taken form: brilliant, wonderful, beautiful artwork about those 3 subjects in general. And of course, this one we know and love. And of course, on the right-hand side are the 3, and on the left-hand side are the 4. And we'll get into the quadrivium, a little bitty sliver. We'll dip a toe in the quadrivium tonight as well. Something for online resources. The first link, as always, is the Warden's Retreat documentation. Thank you very much to Brother Martin Reinschmidt, who hit me up earlier this week and asked for the link to that to share. The second online resource is an essay written by Dorothy Sayer. It's called The Lost Tools of Learning. The GBT has nothing to do with a particular agenda. It's the great books, right? .org, and that's from Sayer's letter there. The Lost Tools of Learning. We're going to dive into a little bit of not politics, but perhaps opinion, given the logical discussion we're going to have later about why the trivium is a good way to learn, right? And then the last one is the fallacyfiles.org website. Fallacy Files is an excellent opportunity for you to refresh yourself about the logical fallacies. Something to learn about? Well, the logical fallacies in general. And the reason being is because I stopped counting at like 90-something in terms of logical fallacies. The second thing to learn about: the difference between rhetoric, grammar, and logic, what those mean in terms of relationship to each other versus the other things. And we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Word search of trivium versus the trivium school, and a liberal arts education. And I see some gray hairs in the pictures of the guys that I'm looking at, including my own. So you guys remember when a liberal arts education meant you had a ticket for the world. You could do anything you wanted with a liberal arts degree. Nowadays, not so much. Anyway, that's another topic. So let's see here. There we go. So in review, grammar is discovering and ordering facts of reality comprised basic systematic knowledge. Grammar is the knowledge part of it. Logic is the understanding of that knowledge, and then rhetoric is the wisdom of applying that knowledge and understanding. Now, that's some interesting keywords we are familiar with in terms of something, something, and wisdom, right? I mean, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, and how those work. So interesting descriptions there, right? Here's the dip of the toe in the quadrivium. And for I was this many days old when I read about how the elementary 3 and the advanced 4 actually work in terms of the internal versus the external. I had an aha moment. The elementary 3, which are grammar, logic, and rhetoric, pertain to your mind, to you, the you-ness of you and what you know, input, as well as a little bit of output in terms of rhetoric, but in terms of you, personal, right? The psyche of you. The advanced 4, however, deal with how we talk in the language of the universe, including construction and mathematical sciences and the heavens. So it's very interesting how we have 3 that pertain to the human part of us, or the you-ness of you, and then the 4 that pertains to the creation of all things, the exterior part, the universality of us. So very interesting that one's 3 and one's 4, and then it, is 7. So very interesting stuff there. And I remember we actually had a brother on that was talking about the numbers and music, right? And he mentioned these particular sentences, so I put them up here, what number is. So the first one, the elementary 3, is nothing but word, right? Or idea or concept. And I love the definition here of skeletonal framework of language. Very interesting. You put the meat on the bones in rhetoric, but you have the skeletonal is the way I say it, framework of language. And then number. So you have word on one side and number on the other. Mathematics, number in itself. Geometry, number in space. Music or harmony theory, number in time. And then astronomy is number in, well, what we call nowadays space-time. So we actually don't differentiate between space and time in field theory. So the trivium method, and again, we're stressing the trivium here because we're putting a big fat red bow on the trivium with logic. It's stressed that the trivium forms a habitual pattern of mind of how to think effectively and not what to think. Very different learning style than maybe we see today. As an added bonus, there's a serene pursuit. And the reason it's a serene pursuit, it says it's because it's a method devoted to the how of thinking, and that's not so much controversial. Instead of in what to think, like religion teaches, literature teaches, philosophy, and modern science all convey, controversial topics and ideas. And one of my favorite sentences from our newly learned graduates from college is that it's science fact, right? Not science fiction. And then I remind them that they thought that the earth was at the center of things for a while. So, and mice used to come from straw and all the other fun things. So, so the trivium method, and we're going to get into this in the discussion, and I really want to. Why do we teach the trivium method? Why did we do that? The Aristotelian way. Well, why did we teach that way? What are the consequences of teaching that way? Like, what are the dangers and pitfalls of teaching that way? And then the bigger question, what are the consequences of not teaching that way? And I think you're starting to see them and live them out now. Some people say that the way that we have in terms of learning is a pendulum. My wife and I discussed that. She's a former educator, so I don't hold that against her. So she was talking about the pendulum swinging back and forth, where we educate one way and then say, oh, that's not exactly right. We go back this way and we educate this way. So in terms of the education of our children and our youth, we change the curriculum from time to time to best fit the needs. And the best example I can give you is in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, when we were cranking out graduates, we didn't need Rhodes scholars. We needed factory workers, and that's where the school bell came in, right? We needed these guys to be able to be good citizens, to do stuff on time, and to be cogs in a great wheel. So we created those in terms of factory workers. That's when the 3 R's were vital, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic, as we all know. Meanwhile, after that, we got in a place where we got fat, high on the hog, and we didn't need those factory workers. We needed educational folks. We needed folks that were scientists, especially with, and not to go too political with this, but during the Cold War, we needed scientists that made things go up in rockets and stuff. And so we actually imported that instead of creating it ourselves. That's another topic for beers on a different day. Great quote from Sir Thomas More from Utopia. He said, would you first break the legs of a lamb and then kick it because it could not stand up? right? And so when we talk about teaching in the trivium, you got to prepare them for the world before you set them out there, right? So in terms of teaching the right way and teaching them how to think versus what to think is a big difference. So the best thing that in terms of teaching or showing or even providing a foundation of education is from Sir Thomas More there. Here's another great quote from Gerald Massey. They must find it difficult, those who have taken authority as the truth rather than the truth as the authority. And I think that's a great example of what we have and see today in social media and media in general, media in particular. And so, you know, in terms of the search for the truth, right? So here's another great quote too. What luck for rulers that men do not think? Yeah, anybody know who said that by chance? It's a rhetorical question, but it's the guy we all know, right? Not know and love, but no. Makes total sense for luck that rulers, that men don't think. And it's not, I don't think he meant that men don't think individually. I think he meant mankind as a group. Here's another great quote from Mr. Carl Jung. Who looks outside is led to imaginings, and who looks inside awakens. So in terms of where you come from with what you think and how you process those ideas is very important when it comes to processing ideas from other people. We say that we learn how to take in an idea without having to, we can entertain an idea without accepting it. How about that? So let's get to the great logic. Tonight, of course, Spock was a ambassador. He really was, of logic, especially in logic. And several times he reminded the cast and crew that that was not logical. So we're going to get to them fallacies. I think that's important. A couple of things real quick. Here's The Lost Tools of Learning by Dorothy Sayers. When you see it, it looks like an old granny's table. That's because it's Dorothy Sayers. The taxonomy of logical fallacies that I told you at fallacyfiles.org. Here's what that taxonomy looks like in terms of logical fallacy: the loaded question, the composition, the division, what they call informal fallacies, the bandwagon fallacy, straw man. Then we get into the Latin, cum hoc, ergo propter hoc, post hoc, ergo propter hoc, all those fun slippery slopes and wishful thinking and illicit processes, and the gambler's fallacy, which is a great one. The masked man fallacy. So these are the taxonomies. So I mentioned those to you. I'm going to close those out. Here are the fallacies in Latin. Ad populum, right? The common belief. Well, it's a bandwagon thing. A great example of the bandwagon fallacy is celebrity endorsements. Anytime you hear a celebrity endorsement, that's the bandwagon fallacy, right? Very interesting to know. And of course, advertising uses all of these, fallacies in their advertising because it helps sway your mind if you're not looking out for them. I worked in corporate radio for quite some time, and I actually wrote ad copy based on these logical fallacies because it sounds good to the ear, right? Ad hominem, that's another great example. The ad hominem attack. I don't know what that is. That's some kind of beeping. The ad hominem attack, a couple of other ones that you may have heard of. Then there are different flavors of the ad hominem, right? The ad populum we talked about, the cum hoc ergo propter hoc, which is a false cause. So there's several of those there. And then let's get to the actual fallacies here. Straw man, right? You've heard of that before. That's someone's argument to make it easier to attack, right? You can exaggerate, misrepresent, or completely fabricate somebody's argument, right? Well, the wife says, when are you going to clean the kitchen? And you say, you didn't put up the dishes, right? That's easy. You can exaggerate or misrepresent. Oh, the kitchen's not that dirty, right? You can say that the straw man is something else. You can point at something else, some other dishonesty to undermine the rational debate. False cause. You presume that a real or perceived relationship between things means that one is the cause of the other. So, for instance, correlation and causation. And one of my good friends, he is my senior warden this year, Brother Chris Cannon, is a very, very outspoken, how do you say, advocate for understanding that correlation and causation are two different things. You know, you can see the little bar graphs that go up that say, you know, here's the people that die in car wrecks without seatbelts, and here is, you know, the amount of times a cat licks its butt, right? And the graphs look the same, but they have no causation that if cats don't lick their butts, people don't die in car accidents. You gotta differentiate those two. Appeal to emotion, another great example, right? Think of the children, right? Every time they think of the children, what about if they have a tear? What if an Indian is up there with a tear about your litter, right? Those are appeals to emotion, unless you're heartless and cold. And if you're heartless and cold, then it doesn't matter. Here's a great one that I've learned about. It's called the fallacy fallacy. And basically, just because things are being poorly argued, the claim itself must be wrong. So, for instance, if you ever had somebody argue with you and they're really bad at it, right? That doesn't mean that their claim is invalid. A great example is in courtrooms, right? Slippery slope. We've all heard this. Is that what you want? Dogs and cats living with each other, right? The whole thing in terms of chaos, right? Everything's going to devolve into chaos if we're not careful. And again, just because A that happens doesn't mean that Z will happen always. The ad hominem attack, we talked about that, attacking their character. You know, a great example is, do you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? We say, well, you're an idiot, right? You don't have to actually attack whether their argument. You don't have to say that chocolate is better or vanilla is better. You say they're stupid, right? They have no taste buds because, you know, you eat spicy crawfish and you have no taste buds anyway. What do you know, right? I love the fact that Brother Paul's on here and kind of grinning from time to time as I mention these fallacies, because he knows that these attacks have also been applied to Masonry throughout time, and sometimes specifically to particular Masons. The tu quoque. Tu quoque is actually, it means you too, or you as well, along with you, tu quoque, literally translating you too. It's the appeal to hypocrisy. A great example, I admit to it, I smoke. I smoke cigars, I smoke pipes, I vape from time to time. And so when my children come up and say, Dad, should I smoke? I say, no, it is bad for you. And they look at me and say, well, you don't have an argument because you're smoking. Well, do as I say, not as I do, because that's a tu quoque logical fallacy. It's a red herring, so don't do that. Personal incredulity. A great example is, well, we can't believe what he says because he's employed by the people that make that product. Well, just because he's employed by those people doesn't mean that what his argument is invalid, right? You can do natural selection, specific religions. You can talk about any type of understanding of the subject at hand and then apply that fallacy in place of understanding, right? You can make stuff up. Special pleadings. You move the goalposts, right? Well, and again, in Freemasonry, we're taught about this particular type of logical fallacy in one of the degrees in the Scottish Rite, where it's how we, well, but this guy is different. Well, when he did it, right? You know, when I do it, I'm totally different than when this guy does it. So we find reasons to believe something when it suits us. Yeah. The loaded question, right? You have to be careful with loaded questions from time to time because sometimes they'll blow up in your face. A presumption built into it. Brother Covington, how many times did you beat your wife? Right? There's no good question answer for that logical fallacy. It's a loaded question. The burden of proof. Again, the burden of proof is always with the person making the claim, not upon anyone else to disprove. A great example is the teapot around the planet Earth, right? Well, if can you say that there is no teapot in orbit around the planet Earth? Well, not unless you know every item that's in the orbit around the planet Earth. So you can disprove and try and prove a negative, right? That's also based on the burden of proof. Ambiguity. I always have a hard time saying that one. Ambiguity. Double meaning. Using double words to, mislead. Well, I didn't say that. I said it this way, right? I didn't use that word. I use this. Or being able to build in ambiguity in statements. Newspapers, magazines, they do, and clickbait do it all the time, right? The gambler's fallacy. Runs occur. The gambler's fallacy basically says thus, and just so you know, there's a whole place in Nevada built on this fallacy, that there's a winning streak, that just because a ball on a little roulette wheel hits on double zeros one time doesn't mean that the next time it's going to happen, right? The odds of a big run happening are very low. As a matter of fact, the run is the fallacy. A great example is, can you possibly flip a coin and have it land on heads 25 times? Yes, you can probably, or possibly, but not probably. And the reason being is because that the previous flip has no bearing on the next flip, right? That's the gambler's fallacy. The bandwagon we talked about, the appeal to authority, which happens in Masonry from time to time. So we're not going to talk too much about that one. You can go back and read that one on your own. Composition and division. Well, and we are very good at this in terms of court of law. Composition basically saying, well, if this part is wrong, then that part is wrong. And that's not the way it works. As a matter of fact, that's the easiest thing to do in court of law, is to pick apart their defense. And that's what they're good at. No true Scotsman. All right. I would tell you guys what no true Scotsman fallacy is, but, unless you're a Mason, you wouldn't get it. It's a joke. The whole concept is, only if you were a true Scotsman would you understand whatever that is. But then the backhanded part of the fallacy is, you can't define what a true Scotsman is, right? The old joke, again, it's shifting the goalposts of what's supposedly true, right? A genetic fallacy. Now, that's not really the genes of the thing, but it could be. It's basically where it's come from or who it came from. A great example is, well, that's a Washington Post article, so that's how we know it's crap. Well, no, that's not the way logic works. The black or white, I'm guilty of this one very, very often. Two alternative states, only possibilities. More possibilities exist, and I was giving you a great example. This is a great fallacy to use in an argument, and the reason being is because I'll ask somebody, well, do you like vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? And the person will say, well, I like chocolate ice cream. And then I would say, well, I believe in the freedom of choice of ice cream, and you are a hypocrite tyrant, and we need to have freedom of choice for ice cream. What are you thinking, and why are you such a horrible person, right? So we can say that you allow more possibilities to exist than just an alternative state of black or white. I like saying, well, do you want this or do you want that, right? A kid comes up and says, hey, Dad, you're a great dad, right? I like to think I am, yeah. I have some homework to do, but I don't want to not do my homework, even though you told me to do the dishes. So do you want me to do the dishes or do you want me to do my homework? And if you pick the wrong answer, you're not a good parent, right? That's the fallacy they're putting in your lap. So the idea is, using that black and white alternative. Begging the question, we talked about that one, the appeal to nature. Anecdotal fallacies, isolated examples of a sound argument or compelling evidence. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy. You cherry pick a data cluster, right? My favorite line, I used to have a t-shirt that said this, is, when all else fails, manipulate the data. Right? So you basically, a marksman shooting randomly at barns and then painting bullseye targets around the spots where he hit, right? So it's easier to say, well, I hit every, bullseye when you paint the bullseye on afterwards. So changing those data clusters around is a little bit different. Middle ground, well, why can't we all just get along, right? Well, yes, you want only chocolate ice cream. I want only vanilla ice cream. Can't we just say that swirled ice cream is fine? And be careful for that one, because that's, well, you're giving up something, aren't you? So with that being said, those are the fallacies that we have. I focused on logical fallacies for the logic part of this, just to illustrate being able to differentiate certain things and think critically. And as every behaviorist knows, if you think critically, then you speak critically. And if you speak critically, then you act critically. So hopefully that helps you with grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and looking at the trivium. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and open up the discussion here. And you're welcome to unmute yourselves. I'm going to stop the screen sharing. Here we are. All right, we got a couple of folks on here. Excellent. See some of the old ones and some of the new ones too. But before we get into a general discussion, Brother Glenn Gerard, how are you doing? I heard you had surgery. Oh, hold on. There we go. Go ahead.
Yeah, you got me now?
I got you now.
All right. Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm hobbling around, using a cane to walk around, but I'm getting there.
Good. Good. Painful?
Not as much as they had told me there would be. I mean, hell, he gave me a prescription for oxycodone, but I never even filled it. Just a couple of Aleve has been plenty enough. It's more sore than pain.
Yeah.
Just ache.
Yeah. My taxes feel the same way.
Yeah.
Brothers, I've spoken for quite some time and went through some of the logical fallacies and the trivium. Feel free to discuss that or just speak with one another as you see them. I see Mark Edmondson's on here too. Thank you for joining. Brother Harry Bermudez. Brother Bryant, good to see you again. Missed you. Brother Mark and Brother Seals, good to see you again. I see some
Brother Troy
on here. Go ahead.
I wanted to say thanks for all the brothers. I had my toe amputated right at a month ago today, and all the prayers helped a whole lot. They really did. So I'm with Brother Gerard. It didn't hurt as bad as they said, but it's still my toe. So, it's still his leg. It's still my toe. So I just wanted to say thanks to all the brothers for thinking about me. Appreciate it.
Well, crap, Mark. I was going to get you flip-flops for Christmas, and you screwed that gift up.
I already buried all my flip-flops. We took them out to the grill and burned them.
Good to hear. Good to hear, Brother Mark. Thank you. All right. And again, brothers, you're welcome to raise a hand or just, weigh in as you like here.
Yeah, we're just, hi, I'm Sean from Slidell. And I got my buddy that lives down the street from me over here. We were listening to the discussion and we were kind of talking amongst ourselves during the presentation. And so my buddy Paul is not a Mason. However, he's interested a little bit. And we were discussing that, a lot of the topics that you brought up was like, oh yeah, that happened this week during a meeting. Yeah, that happened this week. Yeah, that happened too. Yeah, it's funny how everything's analyzed and broken down, and it's like, yeah, there's an actual word for all of that stuff that's going on this week.
Well, and I'll tell you, I'll be quite honest with you. The first place I look for errors from time to time is the mirror, and after going through these particular subjects, I found in particular researching this week the logical fallacies and going over those, I found that I fell for some of them from time to time. Very interesting phrases sometimes. A great example was in the news that we're hearing right now. What's the doctor's degree in that's talking? Right, the provenance and all that other fun. Where did he come from? Who does he work for? All those fun things in order to relegate or negate what he's saying at the time, whether it's valid or invalid. And the thing is that you don't have to have a doctorate to speak truth, right? It helps, but you don't have to be a doctor to speak the truth. And some doctors definitely are whack jobs. You know, that's just the way you put it. But that doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't valid in terms of safety, security, and even, you know, medical information. Just remember that with doctors, they have the definite, clearly defined malpractice over the years as well. So, but thank you for joining us, Brother Mayfield. Thank you very much.
I also wanted to point out that Brother Stephen Bryant, are you in outer space? Where are you?
Hold on, Will.
I can see different backgrounds.
Yeah, the different backgrounds we can select here. Yeah, we've got a couple of them. This one has been my favorite this week. I like this one.
There you go. Matrix.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them released actually for different movies. The more we've been quarantined, the more people have released different ones. I say this is my favorite one. This is actually my favorite one, but I can't do this one for work. So, you know, that's not allowed. And then
you wish you had that hair or what, brother?
Right. Well, you know, that's it. Troy Exotic. Yeah, right. Several logical fallacies on that show as well. So what do you guys think? Here's a couple of questions that I have for the group. Me and my wife talked about this topic for quite some time, and I think that we have gone away from teaching. And again, you have to think the trivium was taught in primary school, right? Like almost nothing else but, and basic arithmetic, addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. That's it. Like number theory and, you know, solving for X and Y and all that stuff. That wasn't done until later because they needed to understand the foundations of understanding, the Aristotelian way of education. And again, the reason that they didn't do that is because they were doing the Dame, D-A-M-E, Dame school, the little classroom, right? The little red schoolhouse concept where slate boards were king and everything else. They used to have tablets, but not the kind that they have now. So with that, we've gotten away from that. And a great example is my twins who are in the first grade and my son who's in the fifth grade were both learning about geometric shapes, right? Polygons and all that other fun stuff. And it's like, well, they don't have a grasp of the language you're using to talk about angles, right? So with that, you know, what are you teaching? And do you guys think that the trivium, those three concepts, are being taught? And then the follow-up to that is a liberal arts education still a good idea?
Well, you know, Brother Troy, one thing we might do to relate this to Masonry is, are we letting our entered apprentice build on their knowledge before we advance them to the next level? Sometimes I feel like hey, it's been 28 days, let's do the next degree. Hey, it's been 22 days, let's go, let's get another one through. And relating what you talked about today, relating that to Masonry, perhaps we should make sure they have a solid foundation in one before we press them to go to the other. And I agree, their level of participation is paramount also, but sometimes our goal to get them through and make a master's, to me, goes into what you're talking about. We don't give them the proper foundation to build that house sometimes.
Well, what is a proper entered apprentice knowledge? What's acceptable for them to know? Or should be expected?
Is that the same as it used to be?
Well, is it? I don't think.
Well, yeah, let's open that up to the group. What do you think? What should an entered apprentice, what should he have bringing to the table before he goes through the degrees, right? I mean, we know the requirements. We know the check boxes, but you know the other parts.
But to me, at least a basic understanding of what he recited during the obligation. And to me, maybe a basic understanding. I remember when I first walked into as an entered apprentice at Atkins, I was scared to death. I didn't know who to give the sign to, who not to give the sign to. didn't know how to act in lodge, any of that. You know, and we just expect them, hey, let's get them through and off we go.
Well, isn't it about light in your own life, directly specifically to you and what you're learning as a result of the degree? I mean, that's the kind of perspective I sort of got, or that I had through my experience. It wasn't, you know, it was more about possibly some of the secrets of life and directed toward me and my part in life, that kind of thing. That's where I see it.
Well, I think that's well put, Brother Stewart. I think that's a great point. I think that you're right. See if they can apply it to their everyday life, as you're saying. I think that's an excellent thing. And not everybody's going to get the same thing out of it. But I think what you said, it hits right on the spot, Stewart.
Well, I remember when I was an EA, I asked somebody, why is that guy with the hat called the worshipful master? And they said, I don't know.
Oh, that's a problem. We've got people that are masters that don't know anything, really. Just like you said, you know, why does the guy wear the hat? I don't know.
Well, and I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head here. I was thinking through this at one's Warden's Retreat 2 years ago, and I've put it into the actual curriculum of the Warden's Retreats every time afterwards. It's that we make folks enter and not apprentice them. We make them fellows, but show them no craft. And then when they're master masons, they don't know what they're masters of, right? Well, and that's exactly what we see churned out, right, Brother Mark? As you said, we sometimes give them days at a time to contemplate what they've gone through.
Right.
Well, you also asked the question about what should they bring when they come, you know, coming in as an entered apprentice. I think what's important is that they bring an open mind and a willingness or a desire to learn, a curiosity.
Well, you know, Brother Glenn, I distinctly remember when you were doing an EA degree, an entered apprentice degree, or you said your spiel at the end, you invited every one of them specifically, learn all you can. And you, in fact, you said, not just about this degree, pick everybody's mind. And that was an open invitation to all of them. And I think that needs to be stressed more so that they're not just learning that book, not just learning the code. All right, I've learned it, I'm ready to go. Let's go to the next step. You know, I don't know if it's a specific time I'm looking for, and I don't think it is a specific time, but sometime, especially with the fast tracks, they're not getting what you offered. And you offered it when you were a master. You offered it every time we did it.
The problem is the new candidates want to associate more than they want to contribute. And the lodge that initiates them doesn't want to scare them away because of the dues. And so they let them do their thing instead of actually working to try to keep them on the right track and learning the work as they go along, in my opinion. And I'm sorry if I stepped on anybody's toes with that, but
don't say toe. Don't say toe.
Oh, right. I'm sorry about. I mean, if I stepped on anybody's toe, not toes, toe. I'm sorry, Mark. I had to pick on you.
Well, and to follow up to you, Brother Gerard, aren't we particularly warned about coming to the lodge for my idle curiosity? You were saying they need to be curious. Aren't we warned against that?
Now, when I'm talking curiosity, I'm talking about a curiosity, a willingness to learn more than anything. That I think that's the primary. That's what when I'm talking about curiosity, that's what I meant.
How about a bravery to ask questions?
Yeah, that one too.
Bravery. I like that. Now, does that matter how old the guy is, or if they're older guys, does that mean that their jello is already set? or does the age matter in terms of the bravery to ask questions?
I think Brother Pohl hit it right on the head. I can distinctly remember being scared to death to ask a question my first few times in lodge, even after I've been made a master, because of the response that I got. Sometimes it's inherent upon us as the members of the lodge to let the candidate know there is no stupid question. Like Brother Pohl said, you know, why does he call it the worshipful master? You know, somebody, I guarantee you, somebody at lodge would guffaw and say, geez, what a stupid question. So the next time the new guy has a question that he really wants answered, is he going to ask it? You know, and so it's inherent upon us to give them respect, if nothing else, for the question they ask. Give them an honest answer, as good an answer as possible, for the reasons why.
So, brothers, I think we all agree that what needs to be brought to the lodge for a new entered apprentice definitely is more than a petition and a money order. I think that the lodge needs to outline those particulars with the candidates before they petition. And it's getting to know you before you know you, right? Doing those that homework and making sure the investigating committees do their job as well. And then bringing seekers to the door. I think that's a good way to put it as well. Of course, we know that the Bible tells us to do that as well, and to always be seeking. With that, I wanted to change the subject a little bit and go back to what we do in terms of educating, not in the Masonic sense, but in education, the liberal arts education. Do you think that that is an invalid form of education nowadays? Or do you think that maybe some of these schools that do still provide liberal arts degrees are still valid to some point? Can you make a man that can learn anything?
Well, I think that the liberal arts still have a place. You know, there's still areas where the liberal arts are valid, but I don't know. I think there may be, personally, I believe that there may be too much of an emphasis on it today in the universities today. It's more emphasis on that than on the science degrees.
You know, I came out of college and worked for a man named Robert Luby. He owned Luby's Cafeterias. He didn't care what you got a degree in, you had to have a degree to work for the man. And we had a guy that actually had a degree in ancient Egyptian languages. What's he going to do with that? Mr. Luby didn't care, because it showed he had the stick-to-itiveness enough to whatever he chose to go the 4 years, in his case it was 5, and get the degree and mix with people and learn how to learn. So is there still a place for the liberal sciences degree? Liberal arts, I don't know what you do with it, but if somebody actually goes to school and learns it, then they're still learning how to learn. Which that's not a bad thing. May not be a great thing, but it may not be a bad thing.
Perhaps it could be a minor. You know, you major in one thing and then minor in liberal arts. Then again, what do I know? I never went to college.
Well, I always thought personally that liberal arts and sciences for people that really didn't know what they want to do with their life and they just wanted a degree. When I was in college, that's what I thought. I don't know.
That's like when they hand you that liberal arts degree, they say, would you like some fries with that too?
Yeah.
But no, I went through and I got a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Science. And when my son was in college, I was pushing him I wanted him to go towards the science degrees, but he went into the liberal arts and he wound up, he's got a degree in history and but he's a teacher. So, I mean, and he uses it every day. So
I think it's funny that we're in a fraternity that preaches and practices lifetime learning. And we as a society have left that behind and said, okay, here's your diploma. or here's your certificate, or whatever it is that you've got. You're done. You know, fine complete, right? You're done, and now go out and change the world. And I'll give you this quick example. I got to learn under the tutelage of a great news guy. And when he went to college, they would go to the new graduates and ask them, what do you want to do now? And their answer for journalist majors was to get the truth out there, right? To spread the truth. And they did the same study with the same question 25 years later. And the response from the graduates was, I want to change the world. Now, if you put those two concepts together, you realize that you'll sometimes change the news to fit the narrative instead of reporting the truth. And that's when the journalistic integrity was called into question in terms of that particular degree. And he gave me that example, and it set with me to this day. So.
Well,
I agree with a couple of the points that have been made so far. Is that the liberal arts degree, as a whole, is more. I mean, it's basically the exact presentation you just gave. Is so much how to think, not what to think. So my degree, I got that 10 some odd years, 2000, 10 years ago. I got a bachelor's degree in business administration, which is. It's a BA, it's a bachelor's of the arts. But it's not so much what to do, it's how to think about different things. And you need to go further as a person and apply that information and apply that understanding of how to understand knowledge towards some particular task. In this case, business and management and things like that. So it's a lot of psychology, it's a lot of understanding how people think, and even, I mean, it sounds kind of derogatory a little bit, but manipulative. So how to manipulate people to do things you want to do as far as a sales standpoint. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's part of sales, is how to manipulate people. So as far as the liberal arts degree goes, I think it is important, but I think it's also important to have something to apply it to.
To follow up to that, you said the phrase to understand how to understand, which is great. Yeah. It's perfect. And then the second thing is how to manipulate, but also how to avoid manipulation, right?
Yeah.
Let me mention something else about education. The reason I joined Masonry was because of my grandfather. He was the finest Mason I knew. And he had a 6th grade education. He came over here from Croatia, but he spoke 7 languages. And he was a calculator. He could figure mathematics in his head, but 6th grade education. So sometimes what you know doesn't always mean that you have a piece of paper. And that's one of the things I heard somebody years ago say, that the Scottish Rite should only be limited to those with college degrees. And I said, that's terrible, because that goes into a lot of the fallacies that we saw just a minute ago.
And you're leaving out a whole segment of great people.
Right.
Yeah. I've known a lot of college educated idiots. And my father-in-law, he passed away a few years ago, but my father-in-law had a 3rd grade education. He got out of the 5th grade education. It was after his father died. He got out of school to help the family work. And he was one of the smartest men I've ever met.
Well, and I find it interesting that
your college
it forbids that, right? I mean, there's a particular, what we call the ditch digger degree, right? It's not the ditch digger degree, but there's a degree that says you value the people that do those things. Not to make this meeting about that body, but yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, experience and wisdom is a more meaningful form of education anyway. You learn by doing stuff, and you make mistakes that affect you greatly. or you learn it in the classroom and they tell you what the result will be. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. But if you go out in the world and you do that, not knowing any better one way or the other, and something happens, you learn from that, and it's ingrained in your memory more, and so you gain more wisdom and experience in that way.
Well, and thank God we don't have to learn by experience, right?
Wow.
We've learned how to learn from others' experience. What a blessing it is that we don't have to learn by experience. If we had to, then there would be no male gynecologists, right?
But you know, my uncle
a
always
lot of
said,
fun, though.
you know, he said there's two kinds of people: those that know not to pee on the electric fence, and those that just have to just do it on their own. Just you know. But no, I agree with Jim there. The experience is a great teacher. I've had a lot of experiences that have taught me some valuable lessons in life. But yeah, you know, but I agree with this whole thing. You know, you don't have to have a college degree to make your way in the world and to be intelligent and to be of value to society. You just have to have a desire to be of value to society.
Yeah, what do they say? You can be a good example or a horrible warning, right?
Yep, that's it.
Well, I will say this. I don't know if anybody can hear this or not.
Oh, yeah, we hear you.
All right, sorry, yeah. Hey, brother, how you doing?
Good.
I will say this. I do have a liberal arts education. And the one thing you do get out of a liberal arts education is that you have to get more education. So that's one of the reasons why you go after that, as for that law degree or that MBA or those other things. So, and I did get one of those as well. So Merry Christmas on that. And I do believe that experience isn't the only thing, although you do get experience through these colleges. So I don't need to know that the iron is hot to test it out and burn myself for the experience of it. I can be taught that.
Well, that's the Socratic paradox, right? I know that I know nothing. Yeah?
True.
I'm smart enough to know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you talk about the history of education a little bit. You touched about how they taught students the reading, writing, arithmetic in the early days of the early 1900s or whatever, and focused on those things. When I was going through school, it was called the modern math, calling it the modern math in the 70s. And of course, one of the experiences I had that was probably a little different than most of you is when I was going to elementary school, they built a school called Apollo in Bossier. And when it was originally built, it was a completely open school. There were no schoolrooms, there were no walls. It was completely open area, and they had a visual area where parents could come in and watch their kids or watch the entire school on cameras and all kinds of things. And but they were open spaces. They weren't walls. I understand that's changed a lot over the years, but that's what they were experimenting in the late 60s and through the early 70s in my education. In fact, it was always that way while I was there. And you talked about today's students, the millennials, and getting a different education on what they know. And we all had different experiences at our different ages with growing up in school and the ways of learning and that kind of thing. But anyway, that's all I have to say.
Well, you know, I think that we've gotten that in school, in the early elementary education, they have gotten away from a lot of the reading, writing, and arithmetic. I'm one of the older guys in the group here. I started school in 1953, and I remember, and it was concentration on reading, writing, and arithmetic, and and that was a foundation. I felt that was a great foundation for the continuing my education.
And I'm probably actually looking at all the videos here. I'm pretty confident in saying I'm the youngest one here. But
I thought I was the youngest one.
I might have a run on that.
I got a little bit, not as much as what I see here. But no, my education as an elementary school and stuff, I don't remember all the details, but I do remember it was mainly science focused. So it was very much, hey, save the earth and all that kind of stuff, and grow up and get a college education. The grammar and rhetoric and, reading and writing and arithmetic, yeah, that was all present. But the things that stand out in my mind is more the science aspects.
But see, to me, most of the sciences, you've got to have the foundation of the arithmetic to do most of the sciences. I mentioned the other day to my neighbor about doing multiplication tables, and I mentioned flashcards, and he's only 10 years younger than me. He had no clue what I was talking about. I said, you never had to recite multiplication tables? He said, that sounds stupid. That's what a calculator's for. Okay. Well, without a calculator, add it up.
I take exception to that, Mark. I'm 10 years younger than you are. Damn it. Is this retaliation for the toe thing?
If you're not careful, I'm going to show you all the toe.
Hey, I gotta say, I don't know about you guys, but when I was in PR, by 8th grade, they was already introducing us into reasoning quantitative. So I don't know about the education here in the United States. A little bit weird.
Well,
they're in Louisiana.
Well, then now, I mean, I've got a granddaughter that's she's a freshman in high school now, and she's already being introduced to calculus.
Right.
That's fine. I mean, I didn't get calculus until I got into college when I started an engineering degree, but
Well, I taught high school many years ago for 1 year. And what I quickly saw was that you were trying to teach the students how to pass a test, not to learn things. And that's what I couldn't handle. And I got out of that, and I haven't seen anything to change my mind on that.
I think you're right on that, Michael. There is a lot of that going on.
Brothers, go ahead.
Troy, your original question, what was your original question that you had there?
Oh, in terms of the liberal arts education degree, if it's valid nowadays, do we actually teach that, or do we kind of joke about it like we have been and saying, do you want fries with that, because it's impractical? And obviously, I think a base foundation of education is necessary, and the liberal arts education, even though we use that word liberal arts education in common parlance, we know what that word means, but I think it's very effectual to be able to have some form of base knowledge on how to learn, right? That's what we were trying to agree on.
I believe, and this is my own personal opinion, you know what they say about opinion, but I think over the last 20 years, the education committee and maybe some of us as parents have lost the art of the 3 R's. People are going forward in school without truly learning the 3 R's before being pushed forward to gain more. Well, if you don't get the grasp of the basics, as in masonry, if you don't grab the basics of masonry, then you can't move forward to a different subject, lecture, or understanding of what you're doing. And I think we've lost that. We're moving so fast in all aspects of life, even masonry. I think we need to slow down some and say, okay, so you got a calculator, but what is 2 + 2? Well, I don't know. I got to have a calculator. I think originally you were talking about how to think, or how to learn to think, or how to be taught to think. And I think that's part of the process. I mean, that's what I'm seeing here. We're not teaching people how to think. They're following. They're not learning.
Well, Dr. Paul, Brother Paul, it's about making the grade. It's not about teaching. It's not about learning. It's about making the grade and moving on. It's that's all it's about. It's not. It's like getting the line through and getting them gone so we get somebody else in. It's not about learning anymore. It's all an individual about learning. It's not the systems trying to teach them.
Yeah, they call it teaching the test.
Well, and it's just like Brother Stewart just said, going back to Masonry again, let's teach them that code book. Learn this. This is going to be on the test. You're going to need that. And once you do that, we'll make you a fellow craft. Now learn this. Once you do that. And then we tell them in the degrees that you'll never start learning. You have received the light, you've received this much light. Really? We're going to quantitate that by just telling them, all you got to do is learn X, Y, and Z, and you're good. Go ahead. You don't have to learn anything else. You're good.
Yeah, I'd agree with you 100%. So there's a couple of things that you said earlier about. What was it? Forgive me. I don't know all the brothers in this room, but Brother Smart, like, one thing you said that they're not teaching the, how to communicate in so many words. So I had a colleague post something on LinkedIn the other day. And this guy's a fairly, prominent guy in my industry that I deal with. And he said, hey, if you guys call me or email me asking for a job, say, hey, bud, are you guys hiring? Yeah, I'm putting that in the trash can. If you can't write me a proper email with proper addressing of, my title and my name and ask a proper question, you're out right away before you even get there. So that's number one. That's you need to be able to communicate properly, and especially in different environments. I mean, I can talk to my buddies next door in a certain way, and I can talk to a CEO of a company in a different way, and we can still communicate the same way. It's just different. Also, as far as like the testing goes, which I've heard that thrown around a little bit, the schools. And even when I was growing up, and Paul, he brought up a good point while we were, discussing is it's not necessarily the student's fault. It is, but it isn't. The schools are geared to get a particular grade. The schools are made to get a grade. So if you don't meet that standard, the school doesn't get a certain standard. So that school doesn't teach you the right way to learn. It teaches you a way to get a grade. So Paul brought up a good point a minute ago. He said that, hey, the teacher posted the answer key to a test on the bulletin board. It says, hey, you guys need to remember that because that's going to be the test in a couple days. So that's not exactly a good learning exercise. That's a memorization exercise. And the same way kind of happens with Freemasonry, when you're doing your degree in Masonry, when you do the catechism, it's, anybody can be a parrot. Anybody can understand and memorize and all that stuff. But to really understand what the topic is about, what the words mean, is a completely different subject altogether.
You're here.
Yeah.
Brethren, I went ahead and muted everybody again. We've come to about an hour into this. I hope and pray that all of us take the educational topics to heart tonight, do some further research on that, and are duly and truly prepared when it comes to be tested as Masons. I want to, before I conclude with prayer, I want to ask Brother Paul if you would indulge me in an exemplary story about language, knowledge, and wisdom regarding the abattoir.
Abattoir. Okay. You read that.
I did.
When I was a kid, I used to ride. I grew up in an area of New Orleans known as Jackson Barracks. My father was in the military. And we used to pass down this road, and it was more rural part of the area. And it was a big building down at the end. And it looked like a shed, a large, tremendous shed, and it had cows going all around it. And I asked my mother, I must have been about 10, 9, 10, something like that. And I asked her, I said, what what is that building? And she says, that's the abattoir. I said, okay. And we just went on. It wasn't until years later that I found, when I was taking a French class, I learned that abattoir means slaughterhouse. And so I asked, I said, why did, she said, well, you weren't ready to learn that. She said, I didn't want you to learn that yet. She said, I just wanted to tell you that it was, I didn't want to lie to you, but I want to tell you another word meaning the same thing, but something that wouldn't upset you, or what I thought would upset you. So that was my misunderstanding and protection, I guess, from childhood. But
no, thank you very much, Brother Paul. I appreciate that. Thank you for indulging me. Let us all remember that we go from language to knowledge, and knowledge to understanding, and understanding to wisdom, and always should be ready to learn. Thank you very much for coming in on tonight's Zoom meeting. We'll have another one next Friday night, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, brothers, thank you very much for joining us, and live long and prosper. Yeah.